I'd like to tell you now about Ephesus. After Rome, Ephesus was the second most important city in the Roman Empire of that era. That's according to Strabo in his book called Geography, titled Geography. Ephesus was the second most important city. We all know about Rome, but Ephesus was the second city. It was a big, important city. Today, it's all ruins. No one lives there, but you can go there and see that much of the city, certainly not all of it, but much of the city has been excavated. If you take the tour of the ruins of the city of Ephesus, the first thing that you might come to is the remains of the town council building. Now, the tour guide will tell you it must have been covered with a roof. The roof is long gone. It must have been covered with a roof. Why? Because there's no floor drains. If it was an open, it's an amphitheater. It's a small amphitheater. But there's no floor drains. There's no drains for rain to flow off. So it must have been a covered structure. And so there's the restored remains of the town council. They had a lot of town council to see. One of the important streets of ancient Ephesus was Churetas Street. And as you stand at the top of Churetas Street, the Hercules Gate will be right behind you, and you look down. Of course, there's many tourists walking along this stone-paved street now. And to the left and the right, on the left and the right side of Churetas Street, you'll see many statues and pillars. And frequently, you can look at those and you can see to whom this statue is dedicated or this pillar is dedicated. Statues and pillars were put up in important public areas to honor particular outstanding citizens of that city. There's a headless statue of somebody named Alexander. He must have been, it certainly wasn't Alexander the Great. Alexander must have been an important citizen in Ephesus. You can also see these beautiful sidewalks, mosaic sidewalks of the city of Ephesus. Then at the bottom of Churetas Street, you see the facade with many columns of the library that Celsus built there in Ephesus. It was actually built after John's era, but the remains are still there. And then to the right of that, what remains of that library, you see a huge triple gate that was there during the time of John and Paul. In fact, it leads on to the marketplace area of Ephesus, and you can read about that in Acts 19. One of the most dramatic of the ruins of ancient Ephesus is the theater. It seated 25,000 people. It was an open amphitheater. Even sitting in the upper rows of that amphitheater, you can hear the voices of the people standing on the stage quite clearly. The acoustics were excellent. In the Roman Empire, they loved to build these amphitheaters, and you could hear of course they didn't have microphones and that sort of thing in that time. Also from the top of the amphitheater, you get a wonderful view of Harbor Street. Harbor Street, there's pillars along the side of it. Harbor Street goes out to and ends at open farmland. Today, well, that used to be the River Cayster. But through the years, the Cayster River silted up. And twice they dredged the river so that their harbor, which was an important source of their income, could be used. But the silting process overcame the efforts to dredge up the river. Several times they had to move the city because of the silted up harbor. And in fact, now there's no river flowing through there. And the ocean, the coastline, is far in the distance. But it was an important harbor city in its day. Ephesus also had several important roads intersecting there. Its harbor and its roads brought all kinds of commerce, trade, and wealth to the city. If you would like to see photographs of Ephesus and most of the other 7 cities, you can go to our website, that's davehagelb.org, and click the Photos tab, and you'll see there's lots of photos there. And the spelling is DAVE.HAGELB.org. And again, click the Photos tab. Another special thing about the city of Ephesus was that they had something called the right of first landing. And that meant that if the Roman governor wanted to come from Rome and visit anywhere in the province of Asia, remember that's a province in what we call Turkey, by tradition he had to land in Ephesus first. And they were very proud of that. They actually put it on a coin. First Ephesus, first landing was on one of the coins that Ephesus issued. Later, as the harbor was silting up and was less usable, Smyrna, which had a very good harbor, applied for that right, but they were denied, and Ephesus maintained the right of first landing. Rome appreciated Ephesus, and they gave them the status of free city. No Roman troops were stationed there, and this was another point of pride of the city of Ephesus. Rome also honored Ephesus by setting up a routine court there in Ephesus to hear important cases. And this was an honor that they gave to Ephesus. The Temple of Artemis was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And it was a great point of pride. No one knows when the temple was first built, but it was destroyed in the 7th century and rebuilt by the Lydian kingdom around the year 550 BC. It was burned down to the ground by a fame-seeking arsonist on July 21st, 356, right around the time that Alexander the Great was born. Then there's a very funny story about Alexander the Great and this temple. Alexander the Great offered all of the wealth that he had gathered from his eastern conquest to rebuild this marvelous, this huge temple, with one condition, that they would carve his name on the wall of the temple. This put the leadership of the city in quite a predicament, because on the one hand, you don't want to insult Alexander the Great and refuse him this generous offer. You don't want to insult him, because insulting Alexander the Great is dangerous. But more dangerous in the eyes of the Ephesian leadership was insulting the goddess Artemis. You certainly don't want to insult a goddess. That can cause you trouble for the rest of your life, which might be short. So they wisely answered Alexander the Great and said, "It is not fitting that one god should build a temple for another." In that way, they complimented Alexander the Great and said, "You're a god," but also they were able to refuse this, in their eyes, blasphemous concept of carving his name on Artemis's temple. So that's an amusing story from history about this amazing temple that was known throughout the Roman world. It was huge. By ancient standards, it was a huge building. That story is from the historian Strabo. Starting in 323, the temple was rebuilt, then it was destroyed again in 262 BC. It was rebuilt in the 4th century, and then in 401 AD, John Chrysostom, a famous church leader, John Chrysostom and some of his followers came and destroyed the temple, and it was never rebuilt. Christianity was stronger, and the paganism of that temple was weaker, and the temple was never rebuilt. Although archaeologists today are not certain about the size of the temple, it was impressive in size. According to the smaller the of the estimates of its size. It was 115 meters by 55 meters. Remember, this was built of stone. This is a huge building. And they were very proud of it. There was a Greek expression, as the sun crosses the sky, it sees nothing grander than the temple of Artemis. They were very proud of that temple. That pride is also visible in Acts 19. There in Acts 19 we read, calming the crowd, the city clerk said, "Men, Ephesians, who is the man that does not know that the city of Ephesus is the temple keeper of the great goddess Artemis, and that which is fallen from heaven?" What fell from heaven, according to their belief, is the statue of Artemis. And so perhaps the statue of Artemis was made by a meteorite. We don't really know for sure. But they felt themselves very honored to have that temple there. Today, there's nothing left except a few stones. And archaeologists or government officials, someone has put up a pillar in an open field, what's now an open field, to mark the site of that temple. So today, if you go to a certain hill outside the city, you can look out and see that pillar and that open field. And behind you, there are ruins of an ancient church building. And among the ruins of that ancient church building are 4 small pillars set up, and it's marked there, that's the tomb of the Apostle John. According to tradition, John lived there in Ephesus. There's actually a house of Mary is there. John was, of course, had adopted Mary as his mother. Mary had adopted John as her son. Tradition has it that there's a certain house there that is the house of Mary there. And tradition has it that John lived many years and died after, of course, returning from exile in Patmos, died there in Ephesus. Some commentaries talk about the temple of Artemis and say that there were temple prostitutes there, but better research indicates that that just wasn't so. Yes, in many temples in the ancient Roman world, there were temple prostitutes, especially temples of Aphrodite, but the temple of Artemis was not one of those. And so that idea that there were temple prostitutes just isn't true. There's a historical text that points out that the priestesses of Artemis served with piety and decorum. We can read something of the importance of the city of Ephesus for Christian ministry, for Paul, especially Paul's ministry, in passages like Acts 18 through 20, 1 Corinthians 15:32, 16:8, and 1 Timothy 1:3, and 2 Timothy 1:18, and 2 Timothy 4:12. Ephesus was a strategic city, and God's servants at that time took advantage of that. And it was a base for a lot of ministry. Today, Ephesus is only ruins. It's a popular tourist destination. Many of the tourists that go there today are Christians that want to see the ruins of the city in which the Apostle Paul and the Apostle John walked and served.